Today is January 17th. This is the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. My name's Dick Rhodes. I'm the chairman, and we consider this meeting called to order. It's 9 a.m. If you'd please stand, if you can, for the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, we have a quorum. All of our members are here, present in the room. I'd like to ask for approval of the minutes of the Budget and Finance Committee minutes of December the 6th. Is there any, so moved? So approved. The next will be a staff report from Cliff Swan, our CFO, for the November and December financial and capital.
Thank you, Dick. Good morning, everyone, committee members. All right, so we have the December year-to-date financial presenting here. We did present November to the governing board at the workshop, and I've attached the November financials in PDF form as well to the board docs meeting minutes. So taking a look at December, for the month of December versus budget, we came in favorable by 70,000. You'll see on membership, we're a little light for the month. This is due to the the transfer fees for home sales. And as we get down to the capital section, you'll see that reflected in the APFs as well. Looking at the expenses, 230,000 unfavorable to budget. The largest being 160,000 for landscape maintenance. This is a highly volatile expense line item, and we made up some ground for some favorable in November year-to-date here, and that's the reason for the large variance. So overall, looking at the income from operations, the 160,000 unfavorable to budget for the month of December. Looking at year-to-date, again, membership is battling those transfer fees. You know, they were very lucrative for us last year, so we're going to continue to see that as we move through the year. Hopefully I mentioned tenant fees earlier. Hopefully with the Super Bowl coming to town, we'll see that hopefully offset by our tenant fees. And we are actually seeing that in general. It's just not enough to offset completely. And looking at the expenses, again, there's that landscape maintenance. We should see that come back, but we are battling, our, inflationary pressures and just some unforeseen items that have happened throughout the year. We'll kind of dip into those a little bit when we talk about prior year. But overall, 90,000 unfavorable to budget on the expense December year to date. And overall income from operations still favorable, 110,000 to budget. Looking at prior year, we're on the operating revenue side, we're ahead of prior year. However, we knew that there were some investments we were going to be making and some headwinds we were going to be coming into with, some of the market conditions, and we are 1.13 million unfavorable to prior year. Salaries, wages, and benefits, we took a look at, a lot of our, labor and competition that we had with the surrounding businesses, McDonald's, the large chains, Amazon. Knew we had to make some investments this year on the salaries, wages, and benefits side, and we're seeing the impact of that, as well as, again, those supply chain and inflationary pressures on the landscape and maintenance and supplies, fuel. We also made an investment in Club Track that we're still seeing, some expense come in for some of the computers and things that we had to install to account for that. Looking at capital, December actual compared to budget, APF fees are down 80,000. On the investment income, we're up 80,000, which is, and we'll continue to see that throughout the year as well, with interest rates what they're at. And then unrealized market valuation change of 410,000 for the month of December. Year to date, we're $250,000 behind in APF fees and to budget, and then on the market valuation change, 880,000 behind the budget. We don't budget anything there, but that's our year-to-date valuation change. Compared to prior year, APFs are, they're going to continue to struggle, and you'll see that 610,000 variation unfavorable in APF fees, and then we're 710,000 behind prior year on the valuation change. We really didn't see that start to decline until the end of the first quarter, calendar quarter of 2022. Some of the notable things we talked about a little bit already, but to put a number on it, 229 APF transactions behind prior year is 32%. Fortunately, we're able to offset some of that with a APF rate increase, and then looking at the reserve fund valuation change of 882,000 compared to 167 prior year. I will say, as of Friday, we were break even for the year, but it's the market, but things are starting to shift a little bit. I think we're seeing that. And on the investment income side, with the higher yields, and on the reserve fund bond portfolio, 118,000. So on capital year to date to budget, 920,000 unfavorable, with the bulk of that coming from the capital related. And then compared to prior year, 2.35 million. On the capital improvements side, we have a budget of roughly 10.8 million, and right now we're tracking to be a loss year to date of 76,000 on that 10.8 million. However, we're projecting a $44,000 variance, favorable variance by the end of the budget cycle, or by the end of the year. That 76,000 was mainly due to the stabilization that we had to add with the facts and findings. But there's some things we're gonna do on the capital budget that will create a positive variance for us at the end of the day. So here are the details to those numbers. You can see the individual capital items, what POs have been issued, where the expected savings and overages will be. So looking at the allowances, 400,000 budgeted allowances. We've issued 106,000 in POs on that, and the details to those POs are listed here. I would say that the big change from November is the Stardust Theater. We had to replace some lighting in there that was critical to their operation, and so we had to use some allowance funds for that. It's all about the reserve fund. And looking at the reserve fund and the FFB percent, budgeted, came in at 54% in fiscal year 22, budgeted to be at 50%. And with the changes we've talked about in the P&L and in the capital area, we're tracking at about 48%. We just like to keep an eye on that, report that as we move throughout the year. That concludes my presentation on December financials. Any questions? I guess I should defer to Dick. Dick, do you have any questions?
I do.
Okay.
One of the things that's always concerned me is our APFs. And, well, there's two things. One is the APFs, and my sense is that we're going to have at least in your numbers, that we're going to have a significant drop in APFs relative to last year, even with the increase of the $500 increase.
Yes.
And that's going to be $750,000.
Well, yeah, at least. So we're tracking at what, 250,000 for the first 6 months. So if that keeps its pace, then $500,000 to budget,
Yep.
and then
Yep.
if it keeps the pace to prior year, it's
Maybe
over
more.
$1 million, $1.2 million.
Yeah, which I think is a very significant number. And the other thing, and I don't want to catch you off guard with this, and that's not my intent, is that our recovery in the bond market. Can you talk about that at all? If we have had, I know we've done some supplementary investment.
Right. So we took some. If you're referring to the operating funds,
Yep.
Okay. So we carry roughly this time of year 13 to 14 million in operating cash, and after we make our reserve payment, that after we made our reserve injection, the 3.2 million from prior year, that took us down to roughly 10 million. And we decided to make those operating funds work for us because of the yields on the treasury funds, the treasury bonds. So we bought some short-term treasury bonds with the operating cash, roughly 4 million worth, and that's going to return roughly 42,000 by the end of the 90 days for us in investment income. So we decided to do that. We won't book that until it's realized, but that's the yield on those treasury funds.
Actually, I appreciate that, and the reason why I asked that is I wanted to demonstrate that we wouldn't have had that money if you guys wouldn't have taken the proactive steps to go ahead and invest some of that operating funds.
Yes.
So kudos to you all guys for doing that.
Thank you. Yeah, that was an initiative taken on by Pete, and he made the connections to start that process, and it was definitely a good decision.
Good, thank you. Do we have any questions? Yes, Ann?
Just real quick, Cliff, and I think I know the answer to this, but just for our audience and the other members, on the APF fees, you do budget those seasonally throughout the year, don't you? They're not just a flat?
That's correct.
Okay. So what we're seeing now is what you expected based on prior year sales in those months?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
that was 1,200 budgeted seasonally.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Bagnato?
Thank you, Dick. Cliff and I had a brief conversation earlier, and one of the things that, if we could go back to the very first, or the second slide actually, summary of revenue.
Oops, sorry. That was my fault. Go ahead and hit the projector again.
Okay, there we go. So I look at these numbers, and to me, it's second nature to look at them and to transfer them into, say, if you look at December actual golf, it says 0.95. It's automatic to me that that's 950,000. And I think that these numbers would have a greater impact if they were presented in the form of thousands of dollars instead of millions of dollars. I don't think that most people can look at this and just click know automatically how large that number actually is. 0.95 doesn't sound like it's very large, but 950,000 does. It's a matter of formatting. I'd like to know what other people might think about perhaps changing the format so that it's in thousands instead of millions. Elsewhere in this slides, there are numbers where they are presented as actually all the way out to the last decimal point in millions, as well as some numbers in thousands. And so I realize this is summary, but I think we can get a better picture of it if we did it in thousands instead of millions. And then when we're done with this, I'll have one other thing.
Would you,
Yeah.
Ms. Redmond?
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Frank. It would be much easier because we're used to in the real world seeing it in thousands. I guess my only question is, how difficult would that be for staff and modifying the program to do that? I mean, we certainly don't want to create a lot of extra work for them.
No, I appreciate that. It would be very simple to convert this to thousands.
Thank you.
Then I would agree. If it's not that big a deal, it would be easier to read. So thanks. And again, it's a great summary, so appreciate that.
I violently agree. It's a great suggestion, and it would be much better for a lot of people to read. I'd like to piggyback off of that. I found that the entire income statement that has been presented in the past was very useful for me, as opposed to just the highlights. So even if you don't want to present everything, if the entire package could be included,
Okay.
as opposed to just the highlights, I think it would prevent any criticism to come up of, kind of guiding us to looking at things
Sure.
that somebody wanted us to look at. I'd like to be able to see the whole picture.
Okay, we do post that on the, it's not printed in your packet. It's on the agenda, so I'll talk to Karen. She's not in here, but I'll talk to Karen and have her print those as well and attach them to the packets.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Miller?
Okay, so
Or they are in the packet?
For the purposes of the minutes, are we going to change to thousands from millions? Has that been decided?
I think that's a really good question. I'm not sure if this is just a procedural change that we need any kind of a committee recommendation on. I don't think so. I think what we're going to do is just suggest to you, as the composer of the document, that you change the format from this abbreviated decimal to an actual dollar and cents.
Will do.
Thank you. So the answer to that question, okay, you got it, David. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, I want to correct something. They are.
Oh, they are in there?
Further,
Okay.
They're further back.
Okay, good.
So I missed that part.
All right.
But I also had a couple substantive questions. I think I had three. On the expenses against prior year, although you can look at any of them, on the landscaping. Is it, in your opinion, is the variance due to lumpy purchases of fertilizer and seed as we had last year, or is this more a product of inflation and to be expected to continue for the rest of the year? Could you give us an insight into
Yes.
landscaping for year remaining?
Yeah, so we made some large purchases, so I would say it's both, but the impact of that change won't be as aggressive throughout the year. So we are battling inflationary and some of its timing as well for the month itself. But year to date, I think we'll continue, but we won't see it at that rate.
Okay. Second question, I just want to, this is a test. I'd like a grade on this. Under the summary of capital-related expenses, I have a tendency to net the investment income and the realized or unrealized loss.
Mm-hmm.
And when I did that, I came up with, to put it in Frank's level of detail, $320,000 for the month, and $320,000 loss. If you look at the year-to-date, it's more like about $760,000.
Yeah.
Would that be a relatively accurate synthesis of those two categories? So if you take a look at the money we have invested
Yes.
for in our little nest egg,
In our reserve fund.
we're down about $750,000
That's correct.
year to date. I can relate with that number a little bit better.
Yeah.
Compared to 26 million, or 25 million in the bank.
Okay.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you very, oh, I'm sorry, we have more. Ms. Pagnato?
Yeah, and so the second thing that I wanted to bring up, if we can go back, I think it's 4 slides to summary of expenses this actual year to date.
To budget?
Yeah. That's December actual year to date. Let me see if I'm on the same page. Yes, okay. Question that I have, looking at the summary of expenses, December, the year to date, $640,000 in taxes and insurance and financial expense. Would credit card fees be lumped into that category?
Yes.
Can you tell us approximately, best of your knowledge, how much we spent in credit card fees in the past 6 months?
I could ballpark it for you.
Close enough.
Should be roughly 280,000, I believe.
Okay, so it's a significant number over just 6 months, and potentially 550 to 600,000 over the course of a year. I recognize that this is probably something that's going to get me lynched when I walk out the door, but I think that the community needs to look at alternative sources of revenue besides dues. And I think it's high time that we look into surcharging anyone who wants to use a credit card. For an example, when it comes to paying my annual dues, I simply log on to the internet and I pay with a credit card, and I'm paying the bill in full, but I'm also costing my community money. If there were truly a push to the community to either pay your stuff in cash or absorb the credit card fee or put money on your rec card account using cash, and that would save the community an awful lot of money. I think that this is something that seriously needs to be looked into. I've gone into restaurants that will surcharge you for credit card fees. I've gone into restaurants that will actually show a surcharge for the increasing minimum wage. And so that's all I have to say about that, but I think it's something we need to seriously consider now.
I think that's a very valid point. It's something that we've talked about in the past, and other committees have talked about that as well. I think Frank is hit the nail on the head, and something we do need to do something about. I don't think we can do anything today about this, but I would like to bring this up again at a time in the future, certainly by early next fiscal year. I think this is something that we need to talk about. Ann?
Well, I personally would see this as more of an operations issue, so I'm wondering if this isn't something that our operational staff needs to look at, and it could be included in next year's budget, because we'll be looking at that soon. And that would be something that then would come before all the committees and the governing board, and that would put it at the forefront. I think the timeline, if that's something to consider, is certainly pertinent.
Yeah, I would recommend if we,
But again, I think that is an operational issue. I don't think it's a policy issue at the moment. But I may be looking at it wrong. Others may disagree with me, but I do think it's operational.
I think in either case, I think it's probably incumbent on our committee to either, and I'm kind of naive here, I don't know how we can, short of a conversation with Tim, to find out how we can, how he'd recommend that we deal with that. If it's not a policy issue, or if it's an operational issue. I would say something more editorial, and I know it's going to strike a chord. I think that paying by your dues, where it's once a year, or however it's paid, with a credit card is fine. I think that when we start getting into the transactions of smaller values, you know, i.e. golf, and when they're golfing 2 and 3 times a week, you know, that's going to be a significant increase. It's going to be a significant burden on the golfer, and that might dissuade them. But again, that's something that's got to be looked at. Christine?
Yeah, thanks, Dick. Again, going back to Ann's point, if it's, I would defer to the team. You know, where are the highest percentages in terms of, you know, the credit card fees? And I think a real quick hit would be on the annual dues that we all pay on asset preservation. Well, not so much the APS, because that's a purchase. But in any event, the annual dues, that would be a really quick, relatively quick, right? So you guys can look at what the options are, and I'm all in favor of doing it going into the next operation cycle.
And again, I'm not sure how we handle this right now.
Yeah.
So if we could, just in the interest of moving along, I think do we all agree that this is something that we need to look at? Christine, Frank?
I do agree, and it was a great point and great question, Frank. Thanks for bringing it up.
Can we go to get this and then come back to your question? Okay, John? Yeah, great idea. Ann?
Yes.
Susan?
Great idea.
David?
yes.
You know, I think the community as a whole may not even realize that this costs the community
Right.
that much money. And so a simple thing would be to simply put a little blurb in the monthly thing that comes out that says, hey, do you realize? And encourage people to do like the golf thing. What I do is I go down and I put $500 on my member credit. And I use it one time. And that lasts me months. Okay, rather than going in and doing single transactions. There's a lot of ways that this could be dealt with. I have no problem with the surcharge thing, but you know, I think another intermediate step is just encourage people to be aware of the cost of them doing that. So,
Mr. Brosang?
This is not a revenue generation idea. It's what we do where I am in the summer. If you don't use your credit card, you get a 3% discount off whatever the rate is.
Oh,
So it's a savings to yourself, and the community avoids the expense, but it doesn't generate revenue. That's another way of looking at the same idea.
we agree on this, and again, right now I'm a little uncertain what to do with it. I think that we'll make note in the minutes, and then I'll try to get this resolved before we get the minutes printed. But we've all agreed that this is something that we'll either recommend to the governing board if that's appropriate, or if it can be referred for operations.
would you like to have, I mean, I know last year I did a presentation on the credit card fees. So I can take a calendar year's worth of credit card fees and at least give some more information and insights into where they're being generated, how they're being generated. And the quick and easy is definitely membership dues. If you wanted to say just membership dues, when you start doing it in the other areas, you have competition out there. So you have somebody that could say, I don't want to pay the credit card fee at Deer Valley, so I'm going to go golf at Coyote Lakes because they don't charge. So there's a competition aspect when you start charging fees. So that needs to be considered at golf, but we can definitely look at an analysis so you have more information, and then maybe that then bubbles up to the board or whatever.
This is an interesting point, because this very well could be something that when we review the budget, when it's presented here in 3 or 4 weeks or whatever it's going to be, that may be an issue that we want to look at, that will cut this, but will increase the credit card. We'll implement some type of a credit card fee.
Yeah, so that would, yes, it would be an expense
It'd be an
savings.
offset.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Oh, Gary?
If you haven't already, it might be, excuse me, worth checking to see what Portobello, Grand, and Sun City do. Maybe someone's already found the answer.
And we'll include that with the presentation.
Thank you. Frank?
Yeah, the last question that I bring up is, do our various software packages, Total E, and I don't know if you're still using Great Plains for the accounting, but do these software packages allow easily to make a change, something like this?
I can't answer you fully. I believe so, but I'd have to investigate into that. But yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
We need to move to forward the financials for December to the governing board. So do we have such an agreement? Okay. This would be for December, November and December. November was already presented to the governing board. Okay, thank you, Cliff. Next, we have, this says unfinished business, it's item 4.01. Just as a preamble to this is the third time we've presented this at this committee. So my hope is that we can nail it right now and move it forward. So that, David Miller, would you? Okay.
So I said we will nail it right now. We tried to do an exercise in on-the-fly word engineering last time, which never works. Okay, there was one substantive suggestion made by Susan, which is to add some words about projection of the budget. After discussion with Susan, she decided that was not necessary. So we are leaving the language the way it is. Said and done.
So your recommendation is that there will be...
The recommendation is that the wording that's on the slide right there in 3.2 stays the way it is.
Okay, but this is actually a change to the original.
It is the third change to the original.
Okay,
yeah.
can you talk about that?
Well,
this particular...
Okay, we cycled this back and forth with the staff multiple times, and we had versions that were acceptable to the staff. Cliff and I and Pete sat down and spent quite a bit of time working on this, and most of the changes got asked to be removed. Okay, and so we simplified it, and we basically moved it from where it sat right there in the general part of 3.0 simply to improve the flow. The original premise of this whole thing was that it said that the general manager shall determine the methodology to be used for developing the annual financial plan, but it never said he had to tell the committee or the board what that methodology was. Now, in reality, they do, but it wasn't explicitly stated. So really what this is to try and put some transparency back that says that, yes, the operating team is going to come to the financial committee and to the board and tell them how they do it. So it's a simple addition, just to try and clean up the process flow.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do we have any questions from the committee? Okay, if not, we have a verbal approval on this. Okay, we're going to recommend this to the governing board, and this will be presented at the next voting governing board. So the next item on our agenda is new business. We do have 3 policy reviews to go through, so we're going to try to make this as simple as possible. They all have had some significant work and changes to them. So we're going to lead off with Mr. Bosak. He's going to talk about the collection policy FY13.
Thank you, Dick. You all got a copy of this in his email, so you've had a chance to look at it, I'm sure. For the edification of the crowd, it was last reviewed on December 1st of 2020 and revised December 17th of 2020. So a few years have passed since this has had a look at it. The red line that you see up above was given to Hazelwood's organization. These are his words. The first revision that they sent back to us was really grammatically deficient, to be kind. So we sent it back to them, and this one is much more legible, readable, understandable. And I think that all it really does is incorporate the statute 1807, and we'll talk about those shortly, but that's the simple addition to this. So if you flip to the second page, the most important thing to look at in this policy, which is really an important policy, there's so many things that are happening with this that go undetected, unannounced, and unknown to most of the community and almost all the committees. But this graphic in the middle, the first two, the 31 days and the 90 days, we've been doing for quite some time. Beginning January 1st of 20, we initiated the second two. So the two policies, the 1803 deals with collection, and the 1807, which is a state statute, deals with the lien process, which we adopted and initiated that. So we've now instituted that for 2 years. And so the next change that you see in the graphic on the board to the right of that chart is just the addition of 1807 because it wasn't in the first one. And then the example down below just spells out a little bit more precisely what the collection fees are. And then the red line of 3.4 in total is simply done because all of that is direct dialogue taken from statute 1807. And it's redundant at this point. So it's included in the recommendations of 1807 and 1803. So what I had intended at this point in this conversation was to have Riley and Deb present to you the actual application of this policy, which you don't often get to see in here. And they're probably the unsung heroes of Sun City West because of the cost avoidance and the revenue that they've generated, again, with very little knowledge or fanfare in the community. In talking with Dick, in the interest of time today, what I would appreciate your consideration is to bring them back for a separate presentation to go over all the things that they do, how we generate the revenue, get into the REDS program, which some of you are knowledgeable of, and that's missed dollars and deed transfers that Deb got into a couple of years ago and is really, really significant. I mean, we're talking big dollars that are coming back to the community with that. But Riley has also short-circuited some problems that would have kind of blemished the Sun City West community reputation had they not been handled correctly when it comes to collecting debt from people. So to let them talk about it and talk about what they do, I think is really important, and it'll be very interesting for you. So if you would agree to do that, I would suggest that that be the next step.
Yes, I think that's great. I think that this is something that the committee would very much like to have a more comprehensive understanding of. It is a very sensitive area, but I think that I'd like to set aside some time that you could actually spend maybe 10 or 15 minutes with us and give us a kind of a primer on this. I know that all of our committee members are very sensitive to this, so thank you very much for coming, and thank you for all the work that you've done to this. I know this has been a very exhaustive research on this.
Yeah, we just had a delay, that's all.
Yeah. So do we have any questions from the committee? Very good. Thank you. And do I have a recommendation from the committee to move this forward to the governing board? Yes. So moved. Okay, the next is 5.02, about new business. This one is on property owners, changes and refunds. And this has also been one that has been somewhat troublesome, and I know that there's been a lot of work that's been done on this as well. So Christine Novello, we're going to ask you to take the lead on this.
Sure, and again, kudos and thanks to the staff who were very proactive in trying to help us all understand what some of the deficiencies here were. On the surface, again, it's another one of these, hopefully you had a chance to read it. The FI03 pertains to changes in refunds, but there were two things that were missing, and it causes a substantial potential impact to us. So you can see under section 2.0, the things that were missing were an explicit mention of landlord fees, what we do with refunds on landlord fees, and also how we handle some of the member credit associated with tenant cards. And so those were the things that were really missing. And if you flip all the way down now, thank you. Just to make it really simple, and there was so much work that went on that I wasn't even privy to, but again, thanks to the team we had a meeting where they went through with Dick and with myself some of the nuances here, but the language that's been added is just simply to shore up some of the areas, right? So the first is to make sure that we have an explicit mention of no refund for landlord fees that are paid and that those fees are not transferable. And the 8.0, which was missing, is that credit refunds will be calculated on a tenant card in the same way that an owner card is calculated, in that if there's a refund requested, there's a processing fee to cover some of the administrative manual effort that's associated with that. So this, believe it or not, the tenant cards, tenants and folks who rent were not paying the same fees that our members, our owner members are required to pay by when we request a refund. So, so this makes things more equitable and solves a rather substantial bookkeeping nightmare, as I understand.
Who all did you work with on staff with this?
Well, Cliff, we had Terry, we had, of course, Pete. I don't know if there were others behind the scenes that were working on some of that, but.
Very good. Okay, does the committee have, Ann?
I have a question on 8.0. It says includes member, associate, tenant, and employees. Tell me how employees get into this, because the policy is for member dues and fees. So if as an employee is a member, they'd be a member. They wouldn't be considered, they wouldn't be listed as employees. So why, give me an example how that employee would be involved here.
Yeah, I'm going to have to toss that one to either to Cliff or one of the team.
So our employees have cards. They're like a member card, but that's their employee card. And so they can buy credit for that card. And then our members can buy credit on their card. So none of the member credit refunds were charged a fee. So not only for tenants, but for the members either. So if a member requested a refund, we weren't charging a refund fee for that. Members generally don't. It's the tenants that make up the bulk of the refunds that we're handling here. And what happens is the tenants usually leave a very small balance on there, and then we go ahead and when they leave, we go ahead and process a refund. And a lot of times the result of that refund isn't worth the check or the stamp it was used to send it to the member. Yes, and on top of that, a lot of people would receive that check and they just throw it away or never do anything with it. And then we were left with the processing of the escheat payments in different states, and it's just a nightmare.
And I think, if I may, Cliff, and your question was, what do employees have to do? So now I hope that answers the question for me as well, that employees also have the opportunity to have a card and load credit. So it's the same policy would have to apply for refunds there.
So that would be an employee who's not a member or an association member, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question to you. forgive me for not knowing anything about this, but what is a landlord fee?
When, again, ask these guys to, but when you own investment property, so it's not just a property you live in, but you own the property and then you are still obligated to pay the recreation fees, but you have to pay that fee to, in order to allow your tenant to then go in and get a tenant card as well. So that's the landlord fee. If you're not already an owner member in another way, this is a landlord fee that's paid. Yeah? No, I didn't get that right. Please help me out.
Deb, can you come up to the microphone and explain what landlord fees are?
So, is that on? Yep. So landlord fees are for properties that are single owners. So we always go by how title is held on a property. So if somebody holds title as an individual on a property and they want to rent to two tenants, that's when they purchase a landlord card. You have to have like amounts of owner-paid cards as tenants can have on the property. So that's where the landlord card comes in. It's like a placement holder. Questions?
Thank you.
Welcome.
That was much clearer. Thank you, Jeff.
Commissioner McNaughton?
So if I heard this correctly, and please tell me if I didn't, if a single person owns a home, it's a rental property, they have to pay their annual dues just like everybody else. If they want to rent that property to two people, and those two people want to get cards as tenant cards, is the landlord then paying a second fee? Because they're at, I'm not impressed.
So one thing I'd like to say that if I'm, that many of these changes were actually driven by operational need and by supplementing policy, accounting policy, and to try to clarify it. So, Christine?
I just wanted to add, because we're hearing some information that may be a little mind-blowing, but just this is the way our Sun City West was set up. Our CC&Rs are set up to incur fees by owners on the deed and not by the number of roofs. And I think, correct me again if I'm wrong, but a lot of our sister or cousin type of organizations and communities around us, like Sun City, attribute the fees by rooftop, by property, and not by the number of people that actually own the property. So we're a little unique in the way that Sun City West was set up. This is not I wouldn't want anybody who's listening or here in the audience to think that this is a policy that was created or something that was created by our staff or something that was created by our governing board. It's just the way we were set up for whatever reason. So changing it would be a rather substantial change, but it causes a myriad of challenges in bookkeeping, as I understand it.
Fair to say that when it was set up, they wanted a community of owner members, not owner renters?
Perhaps that was, yeah. I don't want to second guess Gary, but yeah, but this just, I didn't want anyone listening or listening back to think this is something that was created recently. It's the history of our community. And correct me again if I'm wrong on that point, but.
Thank you. Do we have any, Mr. Hobart? Yep.
No, I leaned forward in error.
The only other thing,
Do not
and
raise
again,
your hand at an auction.
really want to thank Terry in particular. I know that you did a lot of work in terms of shagging this down, but there's making this change is actually going to save us a considerable amount of expense, as I understand it, correct? I don't know if we know that off the top of our head, but it will actually, it seems like a small thing, but it's actually going to solve a myriad of process problems.
It will. Operationally, it will save us a lot of time and aggravation and reporting and administrivia.
Okay, do we have any other discussion? And if not, I think I'd like to ask for a recommendation to forward this to the governing board. Okay, unanimous, thank you. We have one final policy review. It's on investment of funds, and Also, this has been a very interesting, fairly comprehensive review. Mr. Hubald has chaired that, and I'm going to ask him to present it for us. Mr. Hubald.
Yeah, thank you. Just when you all thought you were going to get out early. With your permission, I'd like to go to the podium where I could see the committee. Okay. First of all, let me say that there's a lot of yellow, a lot of red on this document. It's not what it appears. Most of these are wordsmithing and grammar, maybe some clarity, some words. There's one or two little kernels of substance in here that I'd like to throw it out to the board or to the committee to weigh in on. The other thing is I have no pride of authorship with these changes. I marked up areas that I felt the committee should look at and then weigh in on one way or the other in some cases. This has been some time since I reviewed this, but our chairman and Pete and I sat down and went through this rather carefully. So with no further ado, I'll try to go through this and I'll call out what the intention of the redlining was. Okay, and as I said, I think there's 13 of them here. The first one, paragraph 1.0, is merely a change from board of directors to governing board. I'm not sure that merits an awful lot of discussion. Our oversight committee is a governing board. It's not the board of directors. It's a simple change. If anybody along the way wants to push back or call into discussion anything that I'm maybe going over too quickly, fine, but some of this I don't think merits discussion. I'll ask for discussion in a few spots. Paragraph 2.0, I struck the words periodic review, and I'm suggesting annual review because to me, periodic is a blinking word. It doesn't really have any meaning. It could be anything. I put in 1 year just as a placeholder. If anybody thinks it ought to be quarterly for our CFO to go over, let's have at it, but I thought annual was more clear than periodic. No discussion? Okay, the next item is paragraph 2.1.1.3, market risk. Simple grammar. I took the S off of the word portfolio. Paragraph 3.0, investment of funds. 3.1, subparagraph. It's wordsmithing. Investment of funds shall consider cash flow requirements. I just felt a little more comfortable with that rather than the words be guided by. I'm not sure what guided by meant. Dropping down into a bulleted paragraph, it says short-term U.S. We are talking about investment of funds for the funds that the community holds for short-term use, the day-to-day operations. And I'd like to come back to this later, but for right now, I inserted the word short-term treasuries and federal obligations. Government and here is an expansion. The second paragraph there, or the second sentence there, I have government or short-term investment grade, BBB or above, commercial securities. To me, that's there's two keys there. One is short-term, and the other is an expansion of our policies from strictly government securities backed by the U.S. government to include investment grade securities. I'm thinking this runs along the lines of what was just done with some of the short-term money to squeeze out a little more interest. It's short-term. I wouldn't be recommending commercial grade securities of 10 or 20 years, but short-term, the risk would seem very small. I think this merits some discussion and input from the people on the committee, I put something in there to call it out and get it on the table. So does anybody have any comments about whether that would be a good or bad idea? Yes.
Ann Brown?
Thank you, John. I appreciate all the effort that you've put into this. I just wondered, have you discussed any of this with our advisors with Cap Trust?
No.
Okay.
And it may be that it should lead to more discussion and a future change. But it just seemed to me we might be leaving a few crumbs of income on the table. And I just think we owe it to the community to at least think about these things. I'm not advocating, I'm advocating we look at it.
I think if anything, this gives us that gives them a broader range of options.
Yeah. So then on paragraph 3.1.2, the reserve funds, now these are the funds that we hold back for our capital. This is our big nest egg, if you will. This is not the short-term paragraph. I've made a little change there. Reserve funds for capital expenditures may be invested in a mix of securities based on the specific annual liquidity. To me, that I'm thinking about that as a restriction. And again, I'd need, I'm throwing this out here for the committee to think about, okay? The restriction, it's a restriction there. I'm saying mix of securities. I'm calling out that we don't want to invest in some cryptocurrencies or other investments. It's a restriction to securities. To me, that's sort of a miss on what is written there. Okay, on page 3, there's a highlight of a semicolon. I don't think that merits much discussion. The next bulleted point, open-end index or actively managed mutual funds or ETFs that trade in. I struck the word high credit in that first sentence because I don't know what high credit means. And if anybody else does, maybe they could point that out, but I thought that wasn't necessary. I inserted instead BBB or higher, which is investment grade securities. And it seemed like a more descriptive, more description of what we want. Domestic and international stocks in the next bulleted point. I deleted or suggest we delete mutual funds or ETFs. Domestic and international stock is fine there. Yeah,
Did you say
yeah,
delete that?
I'm sorry. That was my error.
Okay.
I mentioned I had one error in there. And
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
I'm not sure what I was thinking of, but I think we could all think brain cramp might
that sounds
describe it.
Yeah.
The 3.1.2.1 paragraph, no individual mutual fund or ETF, I've inserted the words mutual and ETF, shall exceed 20% of the investment funds of the entire portfolio. I merely struck more than as a needless redundancy to the 20%. Dropping down 2 more paragraphs, to 3.1.2.3. I took the first sentence out. I felt it was redundant. We've said this over and over, a mix of funds. We've got numbers in here to do those restrictions. I didn't think that added anything, just a cleanup. Now we get into the next one. This is where I'd really like people to pay attention carefully. I'm going to segue into something else in here. Paragraph 4.2, investment of the capital project funds, portfolio and reserve funds shall be managed by a professional investment advisory firm. So there's an insertion there. This represents, in my mind, it describes the relationship we have with Cap Trust today, where we are calling out by policy that we will have a third party, professional third party managing this. So this is one that I think we ought to pause.
I agree with you, and I think I think this is probably one of the key points of the changes that are proposed in here.
Yes,
Is
yes, it
that-
absolutely is.
Is that we're requiring that our funds be managed by a professional organization.
Yeah.
As opposed to 9 people on the governing board and 7 people on the Budget and Finance Committee.
Bingo. So, Gary?
John, should there be something in this section that mentions the requirement that they report semi-annually or quarterly to us?
Yeah, perhaps. That's the purpose of groups make better decisions than individuals. Anybody, Dick, you want to?
We actually can handle that. I agree with Mr. Bosak, and I think that on, in paragraph 4.2, managed by professional investment advisory, monitored quarterly by the Budget and Finance Committee. So all we have to do is to insert quarterly. Okay.
Easily done. Any other input on that? Gary?
I think there's a difference between us monitoring something and somebody coming to report to us what the results are. I mean, it's just a matter of emphasis, I guess, and where the responsibility lies. It's a face-to-face. They're going to come to us with a recap of what happened in that quarter, as opposed to us just. It's part of us monitoring the income, but there's a difference in my mind between them coming to make a presentation to us versus us just monitoring it.
So what are you suggesting? Do you have another?
Yeah, I would say that the investment company comes before the Budget and Finance Committee quarterly to report the results, or something to that effect.
I think when I think monitoring, I think, that I have control over it.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's semantical or if we want to. I think we're making this more difficult than it really needs to be.
Okay.
My sense is that if we put on here monitoring, I feel that when they come quarterly, I've got control over it.
We have a bit of a cover in paragraph 4.3.2.1. It doesn't call out that it would be Cap Trust doing the presentation, but it does say the CFO shall present quarterly updates to the B&F. I'm not sure if that covers it as well as you'd like it covered, but it's input. It's just input. I think the group, in their wisdom, ought to weigh in on this one.
What was the reference on that again?
4.3.2.1, 4321.
Okay. And what's the recommendation here? I mean, this is already existing. It's existing. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Clearly, we want them to, we want some reference to a third party in the policy. That's the big point. Correct. And I think that I'm with you, Gary. I think just another clause or phrase in there, which I can easily add, and we can bring this back with that cleaned up or something. But I like the idea of somebody putting them on the carpet.
Thank you, Chairman Rhodes. I think on 4.3.2.1, we could put the chief financial officer and the professional investment advisory firm shall present.
Yeah.
And that'll put them together.
There's probably 10 ways we can do it, but that would be a very easy way. It would satisfy me, Gary, or... Okay. Now, having walked people into that one, I'd like to now go back and say that we should insert the same sort of language up under the short-term credit, or consider, do we have does Cap Trust manage any of the short-term funds? Okay, and we don't want them to.
No.
Is that also true?
Yes.
Okay, so, okay, then we're cool. All righty. Dropping down to the next, and we're getting near the close of this. Down on paragraph 4.3, I have another grammar correction. Investment advisory firm is the paragraph heading. The last sentence there, I took the word forth. I put the word forth in there, set forth in this as opposed to set in this investment policy. Those are grammar. Some of these, they're just cleanup, folks. The substantive one, I think we've almost wrestled that thing to the ground. But I'll turn this back to the chairman for.
I think you've done a remarkable job with this. And in essence, what we did is we workshopped this together. I don't want to forward this yet. What I'd like to do is to carry this over to the next B&F meeting, and then which will be February 7th. And if you would incorporate the changes that we've made in it at that point, we'll represent it, and then hopefully we'll be able just to move it forward then. I think this is an excellent job, and I think the committee has done a very nice job with this as well.
Thank you.
Okay? Next item, 5.04, it's a review of the $50,000 capital submissions by Carl Wilhelm.
Good morning, committee. What we have in front of us today is the document for the project planning process of CIP over $50,000 summary. This document is just clearly a continuation of the previous 3 months review of the capital. But at the end of November, the governing board did give approval to, in its entirety, give this list to the general manager to be implemented while working on the entire financial plan, where we start blending capital with operating and provide all committees and the governing board the annual financial plan. What I have here today is just the over $50,000 summary of projects for any further discussion or review. And I believe you've had this document for a little while to review, so I will let you ask me any questions.
I actually do have a question for you. These are all, just as a groundwork, these are all proposed. This is all proposed for the 2023 budget. How nimble are we on some of these projects? There's specifically one that I'm thinking about that there very well could be changes made to it that may not require the expenditure of the money. So, but we don't know that now. We might know it later on. There'd be a series of recommendations that may or may not happen. So we've got things that are on here now. I guess the summary is we have items on there now. Specifically, it has to do with MIMO's, the line item for $25,000. And there are possibilities that may or may not happen, depending on multiple variables. So I guess that's a question that's really more generic. Can we move that, or can you explain to me how we can deal with that?
The benefit of moving along in the project planning cycle and getting to these levels where we do the overall budget review in the months of September through November, and then moving forward into the new year, the next couple of months doing a 50,000 and above review, and then as we get closer towards the end of the annual budget review cycle, we hit a level of 100,000 and above. So generally, the light level work of the small dollar amounts under 50,000 are, you've had enough time to consider and make your approval, which we've done. But I will say that, an understanding of once the two budgets get blended, if there are financial decisions that have to be made to, be conservative in either the operating or the capital, that's never not regarded, and you certainly have the means of making your recommendation to the governing board. $25,000 is probably insignificant if we're talking about bigger, financial decisions for making the budget more compliant and approvable. The memos specifically line item for cabinets, their cabinets are in fair to poor condition. The considerations that, we're coming close to their renewal of their contract, and there's been some light level discussions about, expansion or the vendor that is located in there currently, how do things work with the Lizard Acres. So that should be taken into consideration, certainly, and even though an item like this for $25,000 potentially would get approved, if we walked into next season's budget cycle before the project started and we had a higher level of discussion for planning, then it's a simple no to not do the project until a later time next year. That's always under consideration, and just not, defer it. But I would say right now, if we wanted to talk about an item below 50,000, today's kind of the deadline day, but we're at the 50,000 mark level.
Well, I think I'm more concerned about the ability on the fly to even though $25,000 from an overall perspective is not a lot of money, it's still a lot of money.
Sure.
And especially if it's unnecessary, that we don't do it, or we do something and we take it out in 6 months or 8 months or something. So I guess my question here is, I'm looking for some sense of confidence that we're nimble enough that we can address that and make a change and either delay it or cancel it or postpone it or whatever.
There is no component of either operating or the capital budget that's not for consideration or review when it comes down to having get a budget approved. So this is always a flexible list. We just try to move forward in our steps.
And we realize that it's been considered before, and at that point it was considered to be important. I guess there's one other issue, and it has to do with the replacement of some vehicles. Even though, and there are multiple vehicles that have to be replaced, and even if it was decided that we want to postpone those another year, can you talk about the impact of that?
I would say from the capital improvements that I manage, the vehicles you're probably referencing are more in the golf-related world. Would that be correct?
And there's one that's a $40,000 truck.
Okay, then that would fall into the operation side of the business. So again, this is business that we've discussed earlier that probably should have been a little more scrutinized then. I mean, because I don't know what our justification is for review, but if we needed to knock a $43,000 vehicle, that would probably have a little bit more impact in definitely in Todd's world and require a higher level discussion. I know that Todd and Pete and Dan Maurer go over their capital equipment needs very stringently. So I would say that I'm not probably the person to be able to give you that direct answer on if something could be delayed or the whole package for a year.
I don't think it's a question. I think it's a anticipation of the budget that's coming down, and we start playing this what-if scenario game of what if we did this instead of doing that, and it could be just in preparation of that. So we know that the budget's coming down in 4 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever it's going to be, and we know that we're going to get multiple opportunities to review it. So I guess that was the substance of the discussion.
So I would say that the meeting minutes, notes, and discussion here today are heard by the CFO and Pete Finelli, and then I could share them thoughts with Todd Patty, and they can at least have an idea of what you've asked.
Yeah, and I don't want to just focus in on them. You know, the whole thing is, what if? We need to, we have that in the back of our mind when we start looking at the 2023 budget and the proposal. And
Absolutely. So like if you know, I would say that the general manager and myself and other department heads, we've already have the A, B, and C list, if you will, you know, of what absolutely could be pushed off for a year. You know, the R.H. Johnson parking lot of $918,000, I believe, or $989, $978,500. I mean, it's not going to crumble and fall apart in 1 year. So there's $1 million discussion right there. But just remember too that R&R is impacted more greatly by inflation than items new, and we have a very thin new list, so that's another focus point.
does anyone on the committee have a question or comment for Carl? Gary?
Carl, you've had a lot of experience over the last few years replacing lighting with LED, and $309,000 for nighttime pickleball seems like an awful lot of money, but I'm sure you've already done the homework. And what period of time, how long does it take to pay that back?
So really the only answer on return of investment there is a known 40% reduction in energy savings. That particular, and that is due to the wattage of the lighting from metal halide to LED fixtures. So there's no fibbing in that math. That's what those lights operate at. This in particular is a little bit harder project to get an ROI in comparatively to some of the other areas like our parking lots and interior building lighting, because these fixtures actually have to have components greater than just the light, the LED fixture being replaced. It actually needs the arms and the materials to make that happen and still support lighting conducive to the pickleball area. So this one is not just pluck the fixture head off and put it back on, so it has a little more cost associated and not as great of an ROI. But we do have a 40% energy reduction.
And pickleball is committed to a 40% increase in participation at night. One other point, Lisa, you brought the issue up at the workshop last week. I thought that the end result of the MIMOS conversation was thrown at ops because there's some things in works about what should actually happen with the restaurant and all that sort of thing. So it may not be something that's going to wind up being spent, but I thought that was kind of turned over to operations.
Okay, thank you. Ann?
Yes, piggybacking on what Gary said and the excellent point that Lisa brought up last week at the governing board workshop, with MIMO's contract coming due in August of '24, I would like to see if the committee is so inclined to just recommend it be taken out now, but we'd have to pass that on to the governing board for them to make that decision. But it seems to me there's no reason to leave it in. We wouldn't want to do an improvement like that when we don't know where it's going forward after that. And $25,000, I've heard you say insignificant, but that's not to a lot of people in this community, nor is it to me. So Bill may have he's got something else to say about it.
You know what I'm thinking?
No, I don't know what you're thinking. Is that good or bad?
I'm going to mention real quick, though, the memos discussion has kind of caught me off guard because it is a very light level discussion, and all I've heard is a quick discussion about the contract ending. I have no understanding of any changes in that area, and their cabinetry is just as in poor condition as anything that's been aged. Otherwise, we wouldn't have put it in the budget in the first place. So make sure we're not kicking the can here either.
Little bit, and thank you. When we do talk about MIMOs and we talk about potential changes with Lizard Acres and restaurant location, size, and those types of things, it will require some consultation and engineering. And so that potential 25 can help us in our planning. So to go from 25 to 0 might not be the best method to get us from point A to point B, because we will have to do some assessment on facility.
Thank you.
So so we're saying is that we would want to leave it in.
That's some discussion to have.
Yep. She can come up, well, yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
Thank you, Dick. What I'd like to point out, Carl, is one of the things I'd like to look at is for that 25,000, with Ann's recommendation to that committee, is it certainly would not hurt us to push it off for a year and look at what we're talking about with those recommendations regarding lizard acres and the points Bill just made.
I'm not beholden to any project that's ever on a list, so a decision needs to be made, though. That's the kind of the point I'm driving. And I have to say, too, that I'm pretty disciplined in the fact that it's great to understand that, I've presented to you and that this is a cabinet replacement. So if we want to earmark this for design, then I think the label needs to be changed to be completely transparent. So, and I do not have any funds being asked for any design or discussion for Lizard Acres either. So I believe that if that's the case, then the Sports Pavilion Committee needs to get to work.
Carl, this is going to be information for Bill, and a little bit of clarity of what words I'm using here. Encumbrance is a phrase we use in the accounting that when the capital items aren't spent by June 30th of the fiscal year, then we establish on the balance sheet encumbered amount to pay for, or set aside dollars for paying for those. Bill will probably, everybody here will probably enjoy hearing this, because in the encumbrance, they did establish $25,000 2 revenue cycles ago, and that resides in our encumbrance as we speak. It's never been eliminated. So that $25,000 for planning still resides, and that issue is covered then. And then so Carl's alluding to the classic statement of if you're not, and actually to yours, Dick, that if you do approve it, you can establish the funds and then still decide when you want to deploy it. So as Carl's alluding to, if you remove it, you're going to subject it automatically to inflation. But if you leave that in there, you can then await for guidance from the GM to say, I've got the money, and when I'm ready to deploy it, if that's 1 month into the next revenue or budget cycle, or a year and a half, then they're still there. That's why encumbrance works to your favor from a operational standpoint.
Do we have any, Mr. Magnato?
Yeah, I'm gonna, if we can, I'd like to move it over to the pickleball, the light fixtures, and a 40% reduction in energy costs is great, but we need to know how much those energy costs are before we can really come up with an idea of how long it's going to recoup us to make an investment of $309,000. I don't think it's terribly difficult to calculate what our return on investment is and how long it's going to take us to get it back. But we need to know what the annual cost to put the lights on as it stands now is. Beyond that, it's a fairly simple calculation. And so do we know what it costs annually to run the lights in pickleball?
I can provide you that information for the next meeting.
Are they on a separate meter that we can?
No, they are not. They would be a calculation of the fixtures and an evaluation of the time that the lights are on by average.
Okay. Well, I think that it's important that we know, because if we're talking about investing $309,000 and it's going to take 15 years to recoup that money, I'm just not sure that it's a worthwhile investment.
I think that we need to move forward. You know, if we're going to, if we have a motion to, or a recommendation to remove the 25,000, my personal feeling is I think that it's not necessary. You know, we have some assurance that the 25,000 is not going to be spent until there is some sense of direction in the decisions that are made on what's going to happen with MIMOs. The money is there. We can pull it back before it's ever spent. If we take it out, then it's sort of a knee-jerk reaction. Then it's not there at all. As far as the payback on the ROI on the lights, that recommendation was forwarded, and if we want to take a second bite of the apple, since we now are concerned about ROI, I think we can provide that in. If you can provide that information, it's good, but I don't think there's anything that we should do with that line item at this point. We're going to have multiple opportunities to look at this. You know, this is really, we're kind of second guessing what we think might happen. So
This is the purpose of these reviews. These
Right.
are great questions.
they are, and they're things that we have to deal with. So I think if you would go ahead and get us the ROI, and then we'll have that information when we come back to review it, whenever it's probably not next budget, perhaps the budget meeting after that one. I don't know what the general manager's schedule is for the 23 budget, but once we see it, then we'll in earnest be looking at that. Yes, Christine?
Suggestion for all of us on the committee. Let's take a look at this, and if there are other areas where we want to request that kind of insight or a reminder on the insight, let's get that so that way we're prepared to take action and we're not. That's all, and I'm including myself on that. That's a good one.
Okay, do we have any other comments or questions for Carl?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Carl, when you're doing your calculation for the energy savings, what's the current replacement periodicity for the metal halide lights as opposed to what you project the LED replacement cycle to be? I'm just kind of going back. Part of the reason was those light bulbs, as I remember you telling me, were expensive. I don't know if we changed 5 a year or 1 every 5 years.
The cost comparison between a metal halide fixture and how frequently it needs to be changed out, which is what facilities maintenance has clarified for me, is every couple of years. They're very expensive. So every couple of years times 10 years or times 15 years when this new technology is available, we are investing in the future for LED, which has a life expectancy much longer than the metal halide with technically no replacement need until.
Well, when you're doing your ROI calculation, you ought to throw that in because that certainly has an influence in it. So.
Yes, sir.
Okay, anything else? Okay, do we have any? We're going to ask comments from the committee now. Christine?
No,
Mr. Bignano?
good.
No? Yeah? Okay, now I'd like to ask for comments from the audience. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak?
Jack Leary, 128260. I found the conversation interesting about the ROI and the return on the operational expenses for the LED lights at the pickleball court. I've also asked the same question Frank has asked in terms of what is the ROI on installing these things, and what does it cost to run something in a particular facility? And the answer has always come back is we don't meter everything on a discrete basis. And I wonder if we're going, the good news is what Carl's doing with the pickleball lights in particular. Everything that Carl does is great. But with the pickleball lights in particular, the operational savings will be significant, 40%. But we don't know the ROI on the actual capital investment to make those changes. And if we can do that, meter things on a more discrete level, we might be able to get better ROIs on the projects themselves rather than just the operational side of it. So I wonder if the committee might consider a look at how can we get a better look at our ROI on our capital projects and not just the operational aspect of it.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments? Okay, it is, we have no other comments. The next meeting for the Budget and Finance Committee is February the 7th, 2023, and it will be here. So it is 10:30, and I adjourn this meeting.